I want this video to be really good. I guess I start with that. I'm also thinking about what I'm titling this video right now, which I probably should have thought of the title prior to starting all of this. Look, this is going to be a real in-depth video right here. An after prison show investigative expose or report, so to speak. There's going to be a lot of dates. There's going to be some names. There's going to be some conflicts of interest to a certain degree, some things that I'm conflicted on, and some opinions of mine. But there's also going to be a lot of facts with this as well. So let me go ahead and get right up into this thing. It was just this morning that I ran across a story saying that literally on the very first day, we just got a new governor here in the state of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin taking over for Ralph Northam, a Republican taking over for a Democrat. That was a huge deal when Glenn Youngkin won. Glenn Youngkin talked about a lot of things that he was going to do, masks in schools. He was not going to make a requirement. That's a huge story right now, but a story that's probably not getting nowhere near as much attention as it should, and a story that I plan to give the full expose on is a story that just broke this morning, or at least I ran across it this morning, saying that Glenn Youngkin did something that he said he was going to do on his very first day as the new governor of the state of Virginia. He mentioned this during one of his last gubernatorial debates, and he said that if he won, he was going to fire the entire Virginia parole board. And sure as shit, on day one, Glenn Youngkin did just that. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of dates in this video. I want to start first with this date. September 27th, 2001. I filmed a video talking about just this. The video was titled, "Certain Prisoners in Virginia Should Be Scared." I'll leave a link to that video down below as well if you want to check that out. And again, it was in that video where I first mentioned everything that I'm sharing with you guys right now. Hey, if Glenn Youngkin wins this thing and y'all sitting in prison thinking you about to make parole, you should be scared because you will not make parole. I'm going to tell you that right now. And in fact, all parole is out the window. You can bet your bottom dollar on that. And I'm conflicted sharing that with you guys because I know that there's people who deserve to make parole. However, the story I'm getting ready to share with you, you'll understand why the changes have been made, or maybe it'll make more sense or whatever. Maybe you'll have a different opinion. You can leave a comment down below and let me know how you feel. I start this also saying I wanted Glenn Youngkin to become the new governor. Politics aside, which is crazy because that's exactly what we're talking about right now. Joe, you Republican? I don't want to go too deep with that, but the person running against Glenn Youngkin, a former governor, Terry McAuliffe, was a guy that I really didn't want to see be governor again. For a number of reasons, I don't want to get all up into that. I felt like Glenn Youngkin would have been a better governor. And mentioning firing the whole parole board, well, to be honest, it was about as big of a scandal as it could have been. And it was definitely coming, I feel like. Let's go ahead and break this thing down a hell of a lot more. And first, let me start with an opinion of mine. Do I feel like the parole board should have been fired? Absolutely. There was a lot of controversy. There was a hell of a lot of scandal. And I've got so many stories that I'm going to be sharing with you in this video that will just, paint this picture more vividly. But like I said, conflicted. I know that there's people who are locked up who deserve a chance, a second chance, a chance to make parole. And they're probably not going to get that chance now. And that's sad to realize, but here we are. And I'm just sharing with you guys what has happened, what's transpired, and why. Let's go back to more dates. let's start with a little name dropping as well. And I hate to have to do that, but I have to. And this also adds to why I'm conflicted about my feelings involving this story and this topic. Let's start first with Jew Man. Jew Man is an awesome person who served, I think, 28 years in prison, somewhere along them lines, 20-something, maybe 30. I can't remember exactly. Jew-Man had a robbery charge. Gosh, I'm trying to remember. I think it was a couple of robbery charges. I can't remember if anybody lost their life in it, but I do know for a fact that Jew-Man did not himself kill anybody. And he took a plea deal and he got smoked. He ended up getting, a shitload of time. And it wasn't the 26 or the 28 or the 30 years that he served that was his time. He had way more than that. I think he had like 60 years. It would be meeting Jew-Man, beginning to work with him, sharing his story, that another name would get dropped on me. Tim Eberly. Now, you guys are going to have no idea who this dude is, but he was a reporter for our local newspaper, the Virginian Pilot. And back in 2017, on November the 17th, Tim Eberly would write a story with a headline that read, "Virginia bureaucrats are keeping nonviolent convicts in prison much longer than murderers." Folks, this would be the beginning of a pebble at the top of the hill that would snowball down into a fucking avalanche, so to speak. Tim Eberly would also be nominated for a Pulitzer Prize because of this particular story right here, which again would be the beginning that would lead to something like 250 or 300 plus prisoners being released on parole here in my state, Virginia. And it's ironic, I realized this just sharing this with you guys, that the heading of this story says Virginia bureaucrats are keeping nonviolent convicts in prison much longer than murderers. Well, folks, all of the controversy would stem from all of these prisoners getting released. Most all of them were violent. There were so many high-profile cases of people who probably should not have been released. It almost seems like this story had like an adverse effect. This is a super long story. I don't feel like going through the whole thing. Basically, he would expose the Virginia Parole Board for not releasing people, and this would cause things to change. Hence the fact why this guy would be nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. I don't know if he ever won that. I'll link this story down below as well. As a matter of fact, every story that I'm going to share with you, I will link down below if you guys want to go back and check out this information for yourself. But it was in this story, written by Tim Eberly, that another name would surface. The first time that I had heard of, a name, Adrian Bennett, which I don't even know if that was a man or a woman's name at first, but then they've got this big old picture plastered right here of who Adrian Bennett is. Adrian Bennett would be the circle of all of this controversy, it seems, stemming from the scandal involving the Virginia Parole Board. Ironically enough, Adrian Bennett would be fired or step down or resign from head of the parole board, chairman of the parole board, and is now, maybe she was before being head of the parole board, but now for certain is a judge in Virginia Beach. Just keep that in mind. But getting back to Jew-Man, it would be meeting Jew-Man, hearing his story and how he shared with me a reporter for the local newspaper, a guy by the name of Tim Eberly, who wrote a story that would lead to change taking place in the Virginia Parole Board, which would ultimately lead to Jew-Man getting released, who, at this time, a few years separated from his release, is doing outstanding, has had no other problems. So shout out to Jew-Man. Like I said, this story is conflicted, and Jew-Man was also a violent offender simply because of the robbery charges. So don't let violent offender automatically go to murderer in your mind, because that's not always the case. You can have a robbery, an abduction, a malicious wounding. There are certain charges that would be deemed violent that don't necessarily mean that you had to have killed somebody or done, the absolute worst to them. But trust and believe me, there's the absolute worst that will be mentioned here as well. I would actually reach out to Tim Eberly back during the time, that we were featuring Jew-Man, trying to get an interview with him. And, he was kind of interested in it, but at this time he was getting a lot of attention, that whole Pulitzer Prize thing. He was like the top dog reporter, so he was super busy covering all the big stories. I think back to how he must have felt then in comparison to now. Does he feel any different? Because back then, he was viewed as a Pulitzer Prize finalist and a hero. But now, with all the controversy, the scandal, and the dark clouds that surround everything in relation to the Virginia Parole Board, how they've all been fired, I just wonder if he feels any differently. That would be interesting to know. I've got so many notes on this video. I want to make sure that this thing stays on course. And trust me, there's going to be some hard opinions that I'll be sharing with you guys. I mentioned the first mention of Adrian Bennett. Throughout the course of After Prison Show, I would hear stories. Oh boy, would I hear some stories from some folks who we had featured. And, you know, I really began to hear just how crazy this Virginia Parole Board was. Such things as all you had to do was to mention a person's name, vouch for that person, say you think that this person should be released, and we're going to release that person. So forget, you know, if you were even eligible for parole, if you should have even made parole, right? Forget that. Just say the word and we're going to release this person. Now, at this time, I started to have certain thoughts of my own, but I don't want to share those just yet. I will get to those in just a moment. And you're probably thinking to yourself, that sounds crazy, like just say the word. They've actually got leaked emails. There was another part to this that I don't have the exact dates of, but there would actually be a whistleblower who would actually it was the whistleblower who really started to uncover the bullshit that was taking place with the Virginia Parole Board, who would actually leak an email between Adrian Bennett, the head of the parole board, and one of her staffers. The staffer would write, I thought you were looking behind me. Please, I feel drunk with power. Seriously, most of these names are from appointment cases. Listen to what they're saying right here. Seriously, most of these names are from appointment cases. Most of these names, but not all of the names. We're talking about who's getting parole. Most of these cases. This could be interpreted to mean like you're just releasing other people who, hey, by the way, this person as well, let's add them to the list. I like that. Hey, I like them. They good peoples. Let's release them. The staffer continues. The interstate cases are hard to gauge because there is no information, meaning, I guess, cases that took place between states or with multiple states involved. But no news is good news. What does that mean? If you can't find anything about a certain person, maybe that won't be a high-profile, scandalous case like some others that are getting ready to be mentioned in this video. Hopefully with no parole obligations. Hey, let's just let some people out who ain't been in the free world in 30 plus years. No parole. Oh, they guaranteed to make it. They will continue to flourish in no true freedom. You are truly giving these folks a fresh start. Adrian Bennett would reply to that email right there saying, thank you. I will release anyone you say to release. Just let that resonate for a moment. From there would be a shitstorm of controversy involving people that this parole board would choose to release. They chose to release these people. They did this without thinking, is this person eligible for parole? They just said, I want this person released because you said to release them. Let's release them. From there would be 7 high-profile cases of people who probably should not have been released. And then in March and April of 2020, they would release over 90 violent offenders, granting all of them parole. But before we get to that, let's go to a story with a headline that says, the laws did not matter. Leaked reports show a pattern of parole board violations. I'm getting ready to share with you guys the 7 people who were the high-profile cases that probably should not have been released. I don't think they should have been released. That's my own opinion of the situation. And one person in particular, a guy by the name of Vincent Martin. Vincent Martin had served something like 40 years in prison. He originally got locked up in 1979. He was freed last year. We're talking 2020. The story came out in 2021. He was released in 2020 at the age of 64 years old, and his crime was killing a police officer, a Richmond cop. I was looking for the information on this dude's story. It's kind of hard to find. I remember reading something about this. I can't remember where I read it, and if I can remember correctly, it was pretty fucking heinous the way that they shared this story, the details of this guy's crime. Vincent Martin would be one of the top tier, most high profile releases that everybody was like, what are we doing? We're releasing people who murdered police officers. And because of all of the attention that this release surrounded, his parole was delayed after just saying, let him go. And the parole board would actually have to release a report on why this guy was granted parole. The Freedom of Information Act, this information was summoned, so to speak, I guess. And they would have to release a report as to why this guy was released. That report was 6 pages long. It would be stated in the story, the laws did not matter. Leaked reports show pattern of parole board violations. What would actually be uncovered is that the report that they released was heavily redacted. Heavily redacted. Things were changed in this report. There was just a lot of bullshit that came with this report. So this guy, Vincent Martin, he was the #1 high-profile release that took place during this parole board shitstorm. But he wasn't the only one. There would be Irvian Cotton, who was sentenced to life in prison for killing his estranged wife in 1985 in front of their 2 children. He served roughly 34 years. He was released last year at the age of 67. Dwayne Godfrey, in 1994, he was sentenced to 200 years for murder and robbery of a 68-year-old man. He escaped from the Grayson County Jail before a prison transfer that same year and was convicted of a new drug charge 2 years later while incarcerated. He was paroled last year at the age of 51, back in 2020 we're talking about. After serving 26 years, Dwayne Reed, sentenced to life in prison for murder and robbery. He was released after 26 years. Tyson Xavier Golden. Such an interesting name that will ring bells here on After Prison Show because so many people thought that this was Banky. This was not Banky. I can't tell you enough that this was not Banky. We did a GoFundMe for Banky. Like, the proof was in the pudding that this was not Banky. But Tyson Xavier Golden was another dirtbag of a prisoner that they released. Sentenced to 3 life sentences for what was described as a 1986 crime spree that included homicide and multiple robberies and home invasions in Roanoke. I've looked this guy up. You can't find a damn thing about this dude. Remember, no news is good news. A woman, Deborah Scribner, she was sentenced in 2012 to more than 23 years in prison for her role in a Halifax County murder. She was released last year at the age of 66 after serving only 9 years. Patrick Schooley Jr., another dirtbag, scum of the earth prisoner who should have never been released. Schooley received 3 life sentences in 1979 for kidnapping and murder of a 78-year-old woman. There was also a bad charge involved in that as well. They've got the woman's grandson, who's now a grown man, talking about this dude getting released, talking about walking in to find his grandmother murdered with a knife in her chest over $10. And they released this dude. After his 17th parole interview in 2018, an examiner recommended granting him parole, but only with intensive supervision. Yeah, he did 41 years. One of the main common denominators with all of these cases was victims and victims' families, even prosecuting attorneys. They weren't even notified of the release of these folks who could be, they could have some kind of a vendetta, some kind of, retaliation. No victims were notified. They just released these folks, right? Those are just 7 of the high-profile cases that took place. I share with you right here, just scrolling down, looking at either March or April of 2020, the Virginia Parole Board's decision and how many, all granted release right here. 90 violent offenders or 90 plus violent offenders just between March and April of 2020. I don't know if all of these names right here are violent, but this sure is a shitload of names to be sharing with you guys. Now, let me share a personal opinion of mine. This may come across wrong Some people may not agree with this, but it is what it is. When I first started hearing about this controversy with this parole board, I heard about this long before sharing this story with you. I've wanted to share this story with you guys for a long time now, especially because of my beliefs in this situation. And that belief and opinion is that if you were a white dude locked up in the state of Virginia and you were eligible for parole, you wasn't getting parole. Or you was going to be hard pressed to make parole, or you were going to have to fight for that parole. Whereas as a black man in the state of Virginia during 2020, maybe a little bit before that and a little bit after, well, not after, because by the end of 2020, I feel like it really started to unravel with a lot of stories breaking. 2020, as a black man, you probably didn't have to do anything to make parole. Not every black man made parole in the state of Virginia, but a hell of a lot more made parole than any white man. And I hate to throw the race card in there, and I don't do so, to really stir the pot, but that was just the observation, it seemed, and the opinion of mine. Now, of course, there's plenty that can be said about that. As a nation, we incarcerate way more black folks than we do white folks. When it comes to sentencing, black folks tend to get smoked way more than white folks do. And I agree with all of that. I definitely agree with all of that. However, I'm just simply sharing with you that during 2020, when this scandal was taking place and it was at its highest, when it was at the peak, as a white man, you probably were not going to stand anywhere near as much of a chance to make parole as a black man would. And let me go further with that. If you look at this list of 90 prisoners who were released just in March and April of 2020, most all of them are black. And I want to go back to the very beginning, to the story that was a Pulitzer Prize finalist by Tim Eberly. This man single-handedly, at least at first I thought single-handedly, led to the release of like 300 prisoners in the state of Virginia to make parole. What a heroic endeavor to bestow upon yourself, writing this news story. It really didn't have shit to do with Tim. Tim Eberly wrote the story which would get the fire lit underneath the ass of Adrian Bennett, the head of the parole board. If we go back to the very first story where Tim Eberly is exposing this entire thing when he gets to this big plastered picture of Adrian Bennett, head of the state parole board. She would be quoted as saying, "I do see that as a realistic concern and problem that impression is left. That if you're a white person in the criminal justice system, that the game is different for you. The rules are just different," said Bennett, a Virginia Beach attorney. I guess she was an attorney at first. Damn. Then she went to be the head of the parole. Damn. And then now she a judge. This woman has been doing God's work, so to speak. She mentions, race right there. And again, I hate to throw the race card into this, but it's a big part of this story. Let's just call it what it is. She said, hey, look, I see what it is. As a white person, the rules were just different. When she became head of that parole board, and she was going through them emails talking to that staffer, she said, hey, yo, anybody you say, just say the word, I'm going to release them. They was all black. For the most part. There were a couple of white folks thrown into that thing. And forget the... I need to share this. You look at some of the high-profile cases, the worst of the worst. Vincent Martin, the cop killer, they released. I truly feel like they released a few other people who would be high-profile. And this is just like conspiracy theory shit, but what if it's true, right? I feel like they released Patrick Schooley Jr., the guy that had the bad murder charge, stabbed the grandmother in the chest over $10. I feel like him especially was released because he would be so high profile as well. Maybe it takes away from Vincent Martin and Tyson Xavier Golden. I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong about that, but it surely sounds plausible in my opinion. I don't agree that anybody on that list of high profile people should have been released. Maybe the woman. I don't know the ins and outs of her case. Seems like she was just an accomplice in a murder. She did 9 years. Maybe that's the least of the high profile that were so controversial. But as far as the rest of them, fuck them. They should have never been released, in my opinion. But then I think of other people who did make parole. Banky, Jew-Man, those two for certain. Both of those two, amazing people. And I know that Banky especially knows, and Jew-Man too, I know both of them know other people who are really good people, who are doing really well and want to do really well and were granted this second chance at life, you know, through this scandalous parole board situation. And had it not been for this scandalous parole board situation, maybe they'd have never made parole. I truly feel like they deserve a second chance. To go even further, to mention Vincent Martin. I've seen videos of this guy since being released on the news talking about, you know, he wants to advocate for second chance opportunities. I think that that's great. I'm glad that, you know, he's doing something positive with his time since being released. But I don't truly feel like he should have been released. I can say that. That's just my opinion. Did he serve enough time? I mean, yeah, it was a murder charge. People get released for murder all the time, but a cop too? Oh, that just intensifies the situation. Just my opinion. As I wrap this video up, I want to share one final thing with you guys, and that is the story that I just saw this morning with the headline that says, "Meet the new Virginia Parole Board appointed by Governor Youngkin." And when I tell you that you ain't making parole, you ain't making parole. That shit's dead. Just hours after he was sworn in on Saturday, Governor Glenn Youngkin followed through with one of his key campaign promises and fired the entire Virginia Parole Board. He signed an executive order after his inauguration appointing 5 new members to the board and directing the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security to conduct a thorough review of the board with recommendations for administrative, legislative, and policy changes by no later than September the 1st. Folks, let me introduce you to the new parole board. And this shit is crazy. Chairman Chadwick Dotson, former top prosecutor for Wise County in the city of Norton and a former circuit court judge in Wise County. Dotson was elected to the General District Court in 2007 by the General Assembly. Montgomery County Sheriff Hank Parton started his law enforcement career in 1987 and has served in the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office since December of 1993. Carmen Williams is the Legal Services Project Manager at Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance, a nonprofit that aims to strengthen how communities across Virginia respond to and prevent sexual and intimate partner violence. That seems like a good ad. Tracy Banks, an attorney in Charlottesville. That's all they say about her. And the most notable of the new parole board, Cheryl Nishi O'Connell, a name that will mean absolutely nothing to you. A former Richmond police officer who was featured in one of Glenn Youngkin's political spots targeting the parole board appointed by, at the time, Terry McAuliffe. In the ad, she tells a story about how she was shot in the head in 1984 by a wanted man who's up for parole. And in the ad, she says she has to live in fear, wondering, will this man ever be released, or something along those lines. Let me tell you something. You got anything violent in the state of Virginia, you ain't getting out. I hate to burst your bubble. I hate to break it to you like that, but that's just the facts of this situation. September the 27th, 2001, I made the video. I told y'all, change was coming. And I'd be damned if it ain't came. Do I think that this is the right decision to make? I don't know these folks. I would just hope that they would give any eligible parolee or potential parolee a fair shake at making parole. They mentioned new legislative change in laws and policy procedures to be implemented by September the 1st. I truly hope Glenn Youngkin, a businessman, not even a politician, would recognize that there are people who have made mistakes who are deserving of a second chance, and also maybe even some violent offenders as well. That's my final thought on this situation. I just wanted to share this story with you guys. I know it hit hard, but that's the way I see it. That's the way I saw it, and I call it the way that I do both. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you thought of this. Leave a like and a comment. I'll be eager to see what you guys have to say. And as always, until next time, enjoy life, the free world. Never take a moment for granted and make the most of every day. Peace!